everyone. Welcome back to our autumn season of BFI Film Academy Labs. My name is Gemma Buckley. I'm Senior Partnerships Manager at the Independent Cinema Office. For those of you who would like a visual description, I'm a 40-year-old white woman with long dark hair tied back, and I'm wearing glasses. So BFI Film Academy Labs, for those of you that haven't joined us before, are online events for 16 to 25-year-olds to gain industry insight and professional advice to develop their own film programming and filmmaking practices. Today's session is going to be structured, so there's around 25 to 30 minutes Q&A between our two guests, and then we'll open up for questions from all of you. To submit questions, please can you do so through the Q&A function below rather than the chat box, just so everything is in one place. And please do feel free to submit questions as we go along. There's no need to wait until the end. We have live captioning today, so if you'd like to access this, please use the captions button at the bottom of the screen. And that's it, I think. So now the housekeeping is out of the way, I'm delighted to introduce both of our guests today. Screenwriter and director Russell Owen is also the co-founder of Kindred Communications, which produces commercial campaigns for major global brands. His early career was as a storyboard and concept artist before shooting his first short film, Anglesey Road, in 2008, which signalled the start of his full-time writing directing career. His feature Shepard, which we'll be hearing more about today, premiered at the 2021 BFI London Film Festival to critical acclaim. Hi, Russell.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Welcome. So Russell's currently working on a slate of other projects, which we're also hoping maybe to learn a bit more about today. Hosting this conversation, we're equally delighted to welcome back Shelby Cooke, lead programmer and editor-in-chief at Film East, which is the Norwich branch of our Young Film Programmers Network. She is also a freelance culture and media writer, which focusing on British cinema, society, and the representation of national identity on screen. Shelby co-hosts the podcast Film East Chats, which is also broadcast on BBC Radio Norfolk. Welcome, Shelby. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I will pop back in at the end with the questions from everyone watching, but for now, Shelby, I'm going to leave this in your hands. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Gemma. Just to give a brief description of myself for anyone who needs a visual description, I am a mid-20s female wearing glasses in a living room setting with a skeleton shirt on for this festive season. And I would like to introduce Russell. We're very excited to have you here. I have seen your film Shepard before, actually like long before I was invited to do this, so I'm quite excited to be able to dive into that film with you.
Great, yeah, and I will describe myself to jump on that bandwagon. I'm a white male, early 40s, wearing glasses in my living room setting with a poster of Shepard right behind me. That was a happy coincidence. So I turned it on. I forgot it was there. I was like, oh, great.
So why don't we start things off with kind of what was your journey into the industry like? So I know that you have had a lot of different paths that you've taken, but how did you really get to the point where you're directing features and you're premiering at international film festivals like the London Film Festival?
It wasn't easy. It was really hard, and I completely respect everybody has completely different journeys into getting to where they want to be in life. I was always absolutely focused on I want to be a film director, not because that's the job everyone wants, like directing or anything like that. I actually originally thought I wanted to be a comic book artist, then a production designer because I was obsessed with film, and then when I went down the comic book route to tell stories, it didn't give me enough satisfaction when I just see them in 2D on a page. And eventually it was storytelling, which was my main, and it took me a while to fit. I think I was early 20s before I really locked in. I was like, no, I have to sort of make my own films and tell them my way. And it was very tough. I didn't study film deliberately. By the time I come around to that, I was applying for university. I deliberately went down the illustration and screenwriting route because I thought I could draw quite well at that point. So I'll play to my strengths, and that would get me a job as a storyboard and concept artist. That way I'll be able to work with directors, and I'll be able to have practical first-hand experience, learn about staging and visual storytelling, and then be able to go out and work with directors on set and work with different directors all the time. And doing that, I was lucky enough to manage to get a few jobs. A lot of stuff I had to do for free, which I think is illegal nowadays. But back then it wasn't. I was literally on pennies and struggling. But it did give me a really, really rounded experience, and I met so many people from different backgrounds, all trying to do the same sort of thing, and in different departments, cinematography and production design and sound, and that really gave me a rounded experience. But it wasn't until a good sort of 5 years later I sold my car. I really wanted to make my own film on film. So I sold my car, managed to get a load of film stock for free and camera, and managed to just scrape enough together to make a 10-minute short film. And once I'd made that and gone around the festival circuit with it, that was it. I was hooked. But it was to make money and survive at the same time. I wanted to try and stay in the same area. So I went on and worked in TV, but in art department, and ended up falling down a rabbit hole that I couldn't get out of because rent was so expensive, bills were expensive, and I just had to keep working and just didn't have the time for myself. And so I had to check myself one day, a good sort of 10 years after graduating from uni, and I'm going way down there, working on huge TV shows, and it was amazing, but the pay wasn't very good, and I had to do a lot of work to just make ends meet. And I had a really, really good set dresser level at ITV and BBC, but it just wasn't. I was really unhappy, so I had to sort of check myself. I'd done a lot of work. I'd just had enough to sort of take myself a break for a week, and then started applying to what can I do to get more directing experience. And I'd done a couple of corporate films for next to nothing on the side to try and build up a bit of portfolio, and it did end up getting me a job as a creative director at a small agency, where I started making a lot of commercials. I mean, hundreds. And that just gave me access to have money, not for myself, but to spend on, really good crews and equipment and editors and things like, and produce my own stuff, and be taken seriously in terms of writing a story for a brand or something like that. That was where I think my career really took off. And then once I'd done that for quite a while, I ended up working with some big celebrities. And because I work with big celebrities, people are, oh, great, I can give you money to do a feature film now, because if you can work with them, then you must be able to handle a feature film. So I think it was about 16 years after first writing Shepard. I did it in my final year of uni, and then graduating. That was my first screenplay. Somebody had the confidence in me to give me the money to make it. So it was long and it was arduous, but it was I did. By the time I stepped onto set shooting, that film had been playing in the back of my head for nearly 2 decades. So I had no problem just walking in and going, right, that goes there, go.
And I think that's quite inspiring for particularly young people, because I think we all have this romantic idea that the minute we finish uni, we're going to become big time filmmakers, and we're going to make our short film, and it's going to go to festivals and stuff. And, it really does ground it in the fact that you do have to take the job that you don't necessarily want right away, and you do the things that you want to get your foot in the door. And it's great to be able to see that transition from doing jobs that, perhaps set decorating wasn't for you, but it got you to where your films are now premiering at international film festivals.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are we going to see you directing any Marvel movies soon? You have a comic book background.
Oh yeah, no. Weirdly, I've never been a huge fan of Marvel. I was obsessed with Batman, Tim Burton's one. When I was a kid, I was like that. I want to do that. I want to do that. Whatever that is, and that's why I think I went to comic books and production design and realised no, it's actually the film that I like. And funny enough, Lee Took, who made in Shepard the lighthouse, we couldn't find a lighthouse to use in the film. So we built a 7-foot model of a lighthouse and shot it like Lord of the Rings style with false perspectives and things like that to try and the guy who made the model did loads of model work for the original Batman, the Tim Burton Batman and all those good old films. I used to do matte paintings and things. So that's one little great little fact. I keep shopping about.
It's like a full circle moment.
Oh yeah, that was it. I was like, oh my god, this guy, yeah, he's a hero. Yeah, it's Marvel did that weirdly. I was at Citrus Film Festival with Shepard and the directors of Loki and Moon Knight were there. And oddly, we got into a conversation. They're asking me, "Oh, have you got any adverts we can direct? We'd love to do some adverts. Can I do some Marvel? You know, can we do a spot? That'd be fine. I've have some coming up that we can. I would, yeah, I'd absolutely love to get that, purely because of the it's the storytelling that I love and the characters. I think that after many years of being obsessed with the visual, and I still am obsessed with visual storytelling and how you can cross language barriers. Just with acting with eyes and facial expressions, I'm obsessed with that. Which I mean, if you see Shepard, there's not an incredible amount of dialogue in it, and there's a dog, so you know there's a lot of careful editing. And I think comic books can be.
So why don't we?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, why don't we start getting into Shepard? So something that you mentioned earlier was you wrote Shepard at uni, which is something that is very interesting to me because it's a project that you've sat on for a long time. So how did this concept come to be? And what was sort of obviously the trajectory from those 16 years of it kind of sitting in the back of your head and waiting for that production to start?
Well, I went to uni in Kent, and so it was the first time I'd moved so far away from home. I'm from North Wales originally, and weirdly, in hindsight, I remember being a little bit more obsessed with home than I used to be. Not so much, I wasn't so much homesick. I was quite happy to go elsewhere, but there was a Welsh legend of the Smalls Lighthouse, which is the same story that inspired Robert Eggers' The Lighthouse, which was filming at the same time. Weirdly, no idea. Because I thought no one is ever going to have heard this story. I think there was a BBC Coast program that mentioned it once. I was like, oh, that's the story off the coast. Well, that was the catalyst. And so when it came to there was a project at uni called try and do a project which gives us all a sense of atmosphere and space. And so immediately I just went to that story and thought, how can I create? And I built a little model lighthouse and a little cottage and did a little comic book around that idea for the project. And although the project I don't think did very well, that was the start of it. I thought, oh, I really want to do something and explore this. So when I graduated, I managed to get a free trial on a screenwriting thing. I didn't have a computer, desktop, which I could plug into a Wi-Fi thing because it didn't have Wi-Fi. And I downloaded a free screenwriting fit, and I started writing my first screenplay, which was Shepard, and I think it was 70 pages when I first started, and then I just expanded on it, and no one wanted, obviously, to give me the time of day with it. So I wrote another, and I still have them. I wrote another 12 scripts, different films, and then so when I got the opportunity to make one, and I'll get to that a little bit later on how I convinced someone to make Shepard. I said it's Shepard. It's got to be Shepard because that film's been playing in my head for so long. If I don't make it now, I'll go mad. So yeah.
Do we want to play the trailer now and then everyone gives a sense of what the atmosphere and the space is?
Yeah, I think if it plays well on Zoom, I know I think someone mentioned before it stutters, but let's do it.
Sleep a lot.
Why, Eric?
The dreams.
Why?
My God, the dreams.
Why?
Rachel.
You left your father here alone. You left him here because of her. You're only here now because she's dead.
You've no place talking about my wife.
And you've no place here. You can go.
I don't even know this place. It's a far way out west.
Breathing space, Mr. Black. Just that, right? The old cottage. That's your home now.
It's just me and you, Baxter. It's just me and you.
Something's haunting you, Mr. Black. I can see it.
You'd always pull back to what you know. You can't help but follow your blood.
Baxter? Baxter! What's going on?
Nothing that can't be remedied with a little honesty, son.
Who's there?
Likely the devil's child.
What have you done?
You're a bad omen, Mr. Black.
What have you done?
A curse in the very ground you walk on.
It was a selfish and godly hope. Cast down into the fires of hell.
Wake up! What? Wake up! What have you done?
So obviously the film is very macabre. It has sort of that slow burn horror to it. It's not, from the way I perceived it when I saw it, it wasn't very slasher. It wasn't very grisly. Obviously, I think the trailer makes it look more grisly than I think it was.
Yeah.
So it's not your very conventional horror film. Can you briefly go through what the process was like working with producers and how you got people on board to want to be able to make this movie? Was it just happened to be the time? Did it, like you mentioned, The Lighthouse had come out recently, or it was being made around the same time as Shepard? Was it something that was just people wanted that type of story at that time, or was there something else that went into being able to convince people?
Horror is a really easy if you're going to start on something. Horror is very good purely because there's a market for horror. If comedy is quite difficult, and you usually need big name comedians, or you need something, and very good writers and all the rest of it, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of other genres which are tricky, and drama, depending on the drama, doesn't really sell, and so you see a lot of people who start off with dramas and you get them in big festivals and things, but they're always very low budget, and so I knew horror would be commercial, so I've got more likelihood of getting it off the ground. And the producers that I did find, or they found me from a short film I'd made called Occam's Razor. And they were looking for a director for a zombie film. And zombies not my strong suit, never been a big fan. They never scared me. Weirdly, I don't know. Zombies, I'm like, okay. And I said, well, I'm going to make it. I'll make it to the best I can, and I'll do it for free. If you make the next film you make is Shepard, because they had a slate of all these different films. And the word sort of doing that for free, they were like, oh yeah, 100%. And obviously it's and I've been broke for so long, I'm like, I can do it for another year. But that bought me the opportunity to then get Shepard off the ground. And you say it was a slow burn. It's deliberately a slow burn. I mean, going back to that original brief I had for uni about atmosphere and sense of dread, that was what the film was about, rather than, you know, things jumping out of cupboards and all the rest of it. And that's what I wanted to do. And weirdly, having done that and really crafted the script around atmosphere, and also a one man's descent into madness, very slow, sort of, is a psychological descent into madness. That ended up attracting actors who probably wouldn't have normally done a horror film. Tom Hughes hadn't really wanted to do a horror film before, and then he read that, oh, this isn't quite horror film, this is this. Greta Scacchi, who's very famous, you know, from the 80s and 90s as a very different character in big Hollywood films, wanted to do it because it was a completely different thing from her. And Kate Dickie, very well known. I mean, again, going back to Robert Eggers, she was in The Witch, she was the mum. And that role, the fisherman, was originally written as a fisherman, and we wanted to try and do something different with it. So we turned it into a woman, and she leapt on it, because I said, I'm not going to change anything different about it, and just the fact that it's a woman, it doesn't really matter. So she loved the challenge of that, and because we approached it in that way, we managed to get a great cast, and then off the back of that, an amazing crew. So it kind of snowballed once it had gone out and done that, and which was amazing. But yeah,
it definitely plays a lot more on themes of grief and mental illness and those sort of horror things that happen in real life that aren't the spectacle of a horror movie. And I think that is what works really well with placing those sort of themes in a horror setting. And especially in this setting of isolation. You mentioned Tom Hughes, pretty much it plays to himself the entire film. It's pretty much a one-man film. So talking more about the location, what were the difficulty shooting on location? Obviously, you have weather problems, you have, even when it's nice weather, you don't necessarily want nice weather. Can you talk to some of the issues and the unpredictability of shooting on location and how you sort of overcame some of those challenges?
I knew shooting anywhere would be, and I've shot a lot of stuff, a lot of commercial. By that point, I was quite experienced with going out and sort of running and gunning. But the level I wanted to shoot at was obviously much more difficult. And the location I found hadn't been shot on before. The Mall had, but not the far end. And I found out why when I got there. A couple of wildlife documentaries have been there, but that's like, you know, a camera and sort of a cameraman. Not a feature film. And there's like tiny little hobbit bridges and roads. It's all very tweaked. There's no way you can get trucks or anything down that part of the world. But it was, and then obviously the Isle of Mull is a 40-minute ferry ride away from the mainland, and you have to rely on the weather and space on the ferries because they can get quite busy. And it is very, very remote. There's no mobile phone signal. We had satellite phones to communicate to the head office and the production base. So it was much more complicated. And I remember a very angry location manager going, "Why did you not just shoot at Loch Tom?" Which is a tiny little lake outside of Glasgow, up in the hills. And he says you could have shot it all there. And I just sort of looked at him, and I looked at the screen, and we were shooting the funeral scene. He was quite cross that I'd chosen a muddy field, and he says, "And you've dragged everyone here." Weirdly, the crew were quite happy. They were out and about, and they were doing their job. And particularly the camera crew were on that day because it was very windy and it was cold. But what they were getting in the camera was amazing. I just said, "Well, look through that screen." And obviously, he didn't care about that, and he was very, very cross. But there's no way we would have got that anywhere else. And the island itself is a character in the film. I mean, it's a very, very important to get the right setting. And I travelled all the way from South Wales, North Cornwall, South Wales, all the way up through the Coast Wales, across North Wales, where I originally set it, Lake District, all the west coast of Scotland, actually looking for lighthouses and all sorts of stuff. And then when I found that, I thought, I don't care what the light situation is, I'm going to look at the script, I'm going to try and fix that. We have to shoot there. That is the island. And it just had another worldly sense. It's on the same strand between Northern Ireland and Iceland. It's got a slightly, doesn't quite look British,
Yeah.
It looks a little bit otherworldly, so it was, yeah, it was no brainer when I saw it. But it was a huge challenge, but we managed to get through it. And the weather, there was some horrific weather. We built that cottage from scratch. There wasn't any nice decrepit cottages. They've all been turned into Airbnbs now. So there's no rotting away cottages, things like lighthouses. So everything had to be built there, and that was the biggest challenge with the winds and stuff. But we did it.
I totally agree. The location definitely adds to the film. And I think if it was anywhere that felt more familiar, like places that you've seen a lot on screen, I think it wouldn't have had the same effect.
Yeah, and also going back to that point, sorry, about the about grief and depression. That is essentially what the film is about, and putting it in a horror film setting, almost hammer horror, amping up the going beyond the edge of reality to really amp up that horror element. I think that is the main point of the film. I mean, if you've ever suffered depression or anything like that, or having anxiety, it is like being in a horror film. And so that was one of the key. But and so that, again, going back to the location, that was it's beautiful, but it was horrific.
Yeah. So the horror element to me was the dog in the film, because whenever you see a dog in a movie, you know it's never going to end well for them. And I have a border collie, so I was very attached to your little furry actor. How do you? They say don't ever work with animals or babies, and you have worked with an animal in this film.
Yeah.
What was that experience like, getting a performance out of an animal? Because obviously Tom Hughes and the dog are the two main actors in the film, and I think that Tom Hughes works very well with the dog. So how did you get the dog to work with Tom Hughes?
Tom actually broke the news that he was allergic to dogs halfway through production, which
nice.
Trying to keep very professional, keeping it quiet and taking antihistamines, and he loved the dog. He wanted to adopt it by the end. But I love working with animals. I've worked with animals quite a lot on commercials, like little pugs and cats and all sorts of things which aren't, very well trained. But I always get them in a certain situation and let the camera just sort of do its thing, and get them to do different things, and then build it in the edit. But Shuggy was it was a girl, the dog, even though she plays a boy in the film. She was brilliant. I mean, obviously, border collies are much easier to train than a lot of other dogs, and we only probably did 3-4 takes each time. She was a proper professional. Very, very good. Very well behaved. Really, really sweet, quiet dog. Used to spend a lot of time with her when she wasn't in, sitting next to me. She was lovely. But yeah, I mean, I've worked with animals and kids a lot, and special effects. So I and weirdly, I threw myself in the deep end early on in my career doing that, because I had a little girl in my first short film, and then some of my first commercials included animals, kids, and special effects all in one thing. So everything else after that is easy. So when I go in, I'm never too stressed.
Yeah. All right. So this is probably going to be the last question from this formal setting, and then we'll go into the Q&As. But what do you consider to be the most important / must-have element or trope when you're producing and creating an intriguing horror film? So there's lots of horror films out there. What do you think are the main elements to create a successful horror film?
There's only one element, and it's fear. So whatever scares you, make a film about that. I mean, for me, going into a spiral of depression, that's scary. So it's a film that scares me in isolation, away from everybody. For some people, it's a shark. For some people, it's somebody with an axe. Some people, it's a ghost or a vampire or something. Doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter what it is at all. I mean, you look at films like It Follows, which is, a film about I think it's STDs or whatever. Is a whole metaphor behind that, and so they made a film about that. It's fear, and it's just that one word. And as long as you build your film around that one word and whatever scares you, that then you should be on a very good track.
Perfect. All right, I'm going to pass it back over to Gemma, who's going to field some of the Q&A questions.
Thanks, Tom.
Hello, thanks both for that. I'm just trying to group the questions a bit, but maybe I should just go through them one for one. I'm trying to find, there was one specifically about Shepard. So before we move away from that, which was, how did you manage to get the exteriors so foggy? Was it lots of haze machines?
It was very windy. It was too windy for haze machines. We did have one, and you had a little bit of haze machine, but actually the fog in the film was made by the guy or the same programmers, the people who made the fog in, I think it was one of the Hunger Games film, and so it's all CG. It's very good CG. I'm very, very pleased with it, but it's CG, and we did have a little bit of fog on the day, which really helped ground it, so for color matching and stuff. So yeah.
A couple of questions going right back to the start of Shelby's questions when you were talking about your work before Shepard. So I've got one here saying, where shall I start? Would you recommend film rather than high-end television? If so, why? And that comes from assistant director.
If film, well, I had this conversation yesterday, funny enough, with a producer I'm talking with about another film project who just exclusively does film. High-end TV still has to be done much quicker. Film, you get a little bit more time if you allow yourselves to breathe and craft it and tell a more concise, stripped down story in a 90-minute, 2-hour slot. I think with TV, you have to tell a portion of a story with a cliffhanger, so the structure's very different. So I mean, in terms of storytelling, it's a stricter, more refined discipline, I think, than TV. TV, you've got more breathing space to explore characters and story. It can be much more complex, TV, because you have to build a story arc within an hour, and it has to lead on to other things. But with film, you need to be a bit more concise. So there's a bit more of a different kind of art to film, and which I think really hones in your discipline. So when you go into TV, you've got it's almost like a gift, because you can go, great, I only need to tell this part of the story, and then and pass on the baton. So yeah.
Okay, great. You also mentioned when you were talking about making your first short, I think it was, and you said you wanted to make a film on film and emphasize that you wanted to make it on film. Why was that so important to you?
The first film I ever worked on film set was An American Haunting. I think it was in 2004. I flew out to Romania, and there was a big set, and they built it all, and there was film stars there, and everyone's dressed in sort of 1800s garb, and it was with Adrian Biddle, who was an Oscar-winning or Oscar-nominated DOP. He did Thelma and Louise, he did Aliens, he'd done Bond films, The Mummy. Like, he was a huge, big director of photography, and ever since then, the look of that and the way he worked, I mean, I just gravitated towards him, and he taught me a lot in terms of lighting and how to make things atmospheric, and the power of that on film. At that time, early 2000s, digital still wasn't great. It was, it was getting there. Reds had come out, and they were kind of the better option at that time. But it still wasn't great, and it was still quite expensive, and there was a romance to film, I think, which still exists. Today, I'm much more excited, particularly having done all the commercials and stuff, and been able to go in and out of kit houses, and I'm a frustrated DOP, playing with lenses and all sorts of stuff. I've really sort of honed in my my preference for image, but I think film, when I started, was still king. So,
but now
I'm happy with where digital is. It's it's nice. I still love film quite a lot. I mean, when you look at things like Lawrence of Arabia or the early Bond films, so there's something quite magical about them, and bright and Kodak-y and rich, where I think you have to do a lot of work and grading with digital to achieve a lot of that these days.
That leads on quite nicely to a question that's just come in that says, how did you go about collaborating with a cinematographer for films, or how do you go about, I guess, as well?
Well, I've got a very specific idea of how I like to do stuff. I mean, I storyboard everything. In fact, okay, this is completely good timing. I storyboard everything inside out, and I just always need a really good DOP. And I was really, I mean, this is an advert for a Walking Dead commercial. And I'll draw everything out frame for frame and literally just hand it over to the DOP, and we'll talk about it and set it up. And you know, Stoddy, who was a DOP on Shepard, just had a big grin on his face each time. I was like, brilliant, I know exactly. And then it's only a starting point, and then he can start having the freedom to sort of put in suggestions and go, I think we should try it on this lens, and we should go from here, or how about we try this, or do something. And so what's great about doing storyboarding, which so you know, it's the bedrock of my career, is it's a foundation for the rest of the day. It just makes everything easy, and everyone knows where they're at and where they can go from there. So I think that's why I get on well with DOPs, because I'm usually well prepped.
I mean, you look well prepped. That looked like
yeah,
that looked
organized.
Actually, this is quite good, because even though there's questions all over, your answers are kind of tying one to the next one. So I'm going to again go back to one from towards the start of your of Shelby's questions about your way into the industry being through, in part, storyboarding. And would you still recommend that as a way in, which I think you part answered just there by showing how prepared you were, but would you still recommend that? And also, given how things have, what elements of breaking into the film industry have changed, what else would you recommend? I
recommend, I mean, prep for a film, particularly with making sure the script is as good as you can get it, or you know, the best you can get. That is so important. But I think in terms of getting into film, I mean, work to your strengths. Drawing was my strength. I could draw. So I was like, great, that's a great way in. And then if I learn screenwriting, and I can learn staging and lighting, and I can start design drawing around that, that will then give me, people will be more interested in employing me as a storyboard artist. But I'd suggest working, whoever it is, work to your strengths, whether you're in hair, makeup, costume, production design, cinematography, even an actor. Work to your strengths first, to try and see if you can get in, and then learn where you want to be from there. Mine just happened to be drawing, but above all, I think being prepared is the most important thing. I mean, certainly for me, you know, there's no way I'd be able to pitch projects or anything like that if I didn't have anything to show in advance.
No, I think it's really interesting, because we've done quite a few of these BFI Film Labs now with writers, directors, and a lot of the advice that's come through is, you know, make films, just make them, and you know, build your craft. But actually, it's a really interesting way of looking at what your strengths are, and sort of going in that way. And it gives you I was really interested what you said about how it gave you the opportunity to work with and learn from so many other people in the industry. And
it gives you that preparation, but also, you know, 100% make films, but and make mistakes, and don't worry about making a rubbish film. I've made a couple of awful things, and that's okay. It's absolutely fine. You know, I remember making that zombie film, and it looks beautiful, but I didn't write it, and I didn't cast it. And there's some great actors in there, and there are some people who are just like, why was I cast in this role? So I don't know. I kind of jumped in on the helm, and I said. And somebody said, oh, you know what, doing this is going to ruin your career. And I said, well, I don't have a career, so it's fine. I'm just going to do it. And off the back of that, I'd said, I'll do it if you pay for Shepard. And I'm really proud of that. And when I did, and somebody said, oh, great, that's your Piranha 2. And I didn't know what they meant, but Piranha 2 was James Cameron's first film before Terminator. And he always says Terminator is his first film, but it's Piranha 2, which he doesn't talk about. So it doesn't matter about, you know, everything you do is important. Almost every mistake you make is really important, because that shapes what filmmaker you're going to be. And people really do freak out if they've made something they're not happy with, but it's not a problem.
Another question that's come in is, you've part answered it as well, but maybe a bit more detail would be really helpful. How did you manage to take the time to make a film when you were struggling financially? So maybe not so much, well, maybe Shepard, but I mean, you explained about the funding coming in from that, but just your progression of your filmmaking career. How did you balance that?
I had some expenses that they owed me, the production company. So rather than taking a big fee, I took expenses, and including those expenses, they did give me enough for my rent and my bills. So although I wasn't going to go on holiday or anything else, or get a mortgage or anything like that, I was saving, so that was covered, and I think that was important. I mean, you know, when you see Shepard, and it is, you know, it did cost a lot of money, even though it's still technically a very low budget film. It was over £1 million. It would be really heartless to let the director get kicked out of their flat by the time they got back to London. So they did sort of cover that, and the same with the zombie film. But it was tough because, I mean, I defaulted on a credit card, and my credit rating was just awful, and it was a mess, and I knew it was that, but my stress level just, I have a very sort of outside view on things. I mean, you know, someone said you shouldn't be doing film, you should, you know, be doing a proper job and things like that because of your credit card and things like that. And I'm like, at the end of the day, it's just money, and I'm not really going to have a life if I really focus on money. So, you know, my advice usually is don't take anybody else's advice, always go with your gut. And my gut said just go and make the film. So I did it, and I worried about the money afterwards, and it was my finances were a mess, but I'm better now. I'm back into the commercials, and I've recovered.
Do you still find that you know, you still today you're making the commercials, but you seem to be rewarded by that as well, if you see what I mean? Yeah.
With commercials is, although they're much easier, they're not as much of a challenge. You have a different challenge each time, because when you're making a commercial, you are selling somebody else's product, and so you've got to listen to their story and what they want to do, and what, you know, where they sit, and then you choose your team, and you go ahead and you advertise that product with the best, you know, and you have to make a really concise little 3-beat story in 30 seconds or whatever that goes up on TV. And the amount of Christmas ads I've done this year, I mean, I've been Christmas for me since probably March. Snow machines, Christmas tree, but it's fun because I don't need to use as much brain power because I'm selling a product. When you're making a film, you're making a product to sell. The film is the product. So what's lovely about commercials is you've already got, the client is giving you everything. You know, I want this bottle of perfume to look beautiful, and I kind of want a beautiful model or something like that to spray it on. Okay, great, I can do that, and I know that the focus is going to be on that bottle, and that people desire that bottle, and the cinematographer's got to make that bottle look lovely, blah blah blah. And that is completely satisfying from cinematography point of view, and then from an editing point of view, how do you balance that with the music? And it's really short, it's like 30 seconds, whatever it is. So it satisfies you in a completely different way. When you're making a film, you're making the bottle, you're making the perfume, you're making the story, you're doing the whole thing. So it's a much bigger challenge. It's like going for a hill walk or climbing Everest every couple of years. So or going for a hill walk on a weekend. That's the difference. So of course it's still satisfying, but you always want to go back to Everest every couple of years.
And again, that leads us on to a couple of people have asked more or less the same question, which is, well, one, what is your next project? And the other is, what horror projects you're currently working on? And actually they've asked if you're open to new pitches. If so, what are you looking for? So you've got what's coming up, and is it horror?
It's weird. I'm at a strange crossroads. I was speaking to somebody about potentially jumping on and directing a project that one of their writers is doing. It's all ready to go next year, but the script's halfway through. I've not seen the script yet, but that is a horror base. It's a thriller based on a true story about a serial killer in the 80s. So I can't say much more about that, but it's very, very good. And again, I've just been asked about it. I'm up for it. And then I've written 3 other things. One's an all-out horror. One's actually a comedy, but we're quite a dark one. And the other is it's a little bit more of a drama, a dark drama, sci-fi. And I've written couple of treatments for other things. So it depends on what comes first. It's probably the other one, because it's almost ready to go. And am I open to pitches and stuff? Yeah, I always am. I mean, you know, Shepard kind of, I think that I feel like my career started with that, because that's set the template for my style and what I want to do. And I like using atmosphere, and I like a sense of dread and all the, you know, and I love characters, really rich characters, because once you can sort of refine them, you attract really good actors. And between action and cut, there's nothing you can do. You have to rely 100% on the actor to tell the story. And so I always try and make sure I can do my best to find the best actors I can.
So
Gemma,
sorry, Shelby.
do you mind if I jump in? I have a question, just one more that kind of goes along with that.
Absolutely.
Would you ever consider doing like a mini series on TV? Like, would you want to go back to TV? And because the mini series is very different from just directing one episode. I think it is like sort of that film in an elongated form. Would that be something that you would want to go into, or
Oh yeah, 100%. Purely because TV has come on leaps and bounds in the last 10 years. Yeah. I mean, it is like film, and you know the crews are the same now. It's the same kind of thing. The different, particularly with a mini series, is it's essentially just an extended feature film. I mean, you know, I could shoot something for ages and have a 5-hour cut, and they're like, you're not putting that in the cinema. You're going to have to condense it down to 90 minutes or whatever it is. So yeah, I mean, I love the idea of a mini series, and I shoot quite fast anyway. I think I touched on it before about shooting TV. You have to be much quicker, but because I know exactly what I want to do, I'll just, you know, make sure that the team's all ready to go and shoot quite fast. So yeah, I'd absolutely love that in the future, but we'll see what comes along.
I have a couple of questions about the horror genre, I guess. So firstly, Barney asked, what do you think are the key elements to delivering an effective jump scare, especially in a short horror film?
Oh, I don't know. Weirdly enough, I remember when I first started working with the BFI, Noel Goodwin, who's a future film professor, and Rob Savage was there, and he was learning. He was on sort of some program and learning, and then he was helping out with the future film professor. And he's now, you know, he's probably the king of jump scares. It is a gift. I'm not a king of jump scares. There's a couple in Shepard, but it never watch. Anything I watch of Rob, I'm an absolute wreck afterwards, because I'm just on the edge of my seat all the time. I think it's a combination of things. It's firstly, always do the unexpected. Because particularly if you're, and I've just come back from Sitges Horror Film Festival, where the horror fans are very much adult, they're ready for everything. They've seen it all. So you have to take the usual jump scares, and you'll probably see top 10 or whatever on YouTube, watch them, study them, and then do the opposite of what they do, because everyone's expecting them. So always do what people don't expect, and you'll start garnering a lot more attention, but it is a combination of sounds, edit, and that visual. I mean, it's a visual format. You know, what is it that's going to make you jump, or what isn't it that's going to make you jump? So yeah, but the unexpected, I think, is the key to a good jump scare.
Yeah, I think that sort of part answers Amy's question as well. She was asking, when making a horror, were you ever concerned about the desensitization that a lot of people have to horror these days, and that making a slow burner is the opposite of the jump scare films that come out a lot today?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there is a lot of desensitization. People do protect, and weirdly, it's still, you know, still getting. Oh, have you got anything that's sort of, you know, can you do anything jumpy or anything like that? And it's kind of, people are still actually the same thing, because it's people still go out and buy it. You know, they still. There's still a big market for it, but there's not as much excitement in it. I mean, the thing that scared me the most recently was that Netflix documentary, which was Night Stalker, and it's a documentary, but just the way, because it was a true story and the way they led into it, there was some music and things in that made me jump a few times because I was really absorbed in the story. And again, going back to jump scares, making sure people are really absorbed with your characters in your story before you do one, and then it'll be more rewarding, you know, like the severed head in Jaws that floats out through that hole. That's always a good classic. Yeah, I would say the slow burners more. I mean, it's awful things, elevated horror, as if, you know, it's really pretentious things, as if, you know, it's much more important horror than other horror. It's more a so I mean, Shepard is something which is, I think, better watched. Although I had a great reception on a big screen, it's made for a big screen. I think it's almost better watched alone or with one at home in a quiet environment, because you're not going to be distracted by noises or shuffling or phones or anything like that. Hopefully, if you said, and you're going to be settled, and that's when you really sort of get into it. And it's a different brand. There's lots of new films which are much more like that nowadays, like Midsummer and sort of Ari Aster's stuff, and Robert Eggers as well, to a lot of an extent.
We're nearly out of time. I do have one more question. Shelby, did you have any other questions at all?
No, I think we touched on everything that I had leftover questions. I think we all touched on.
I just had one, which was, I wondered, where are, this is mine actually, not from the group, where are the other 12 scripts that you wrote at uni, and which one of them would you want to make now, if you could?
There's one, I won't say the title of it. It is that comedy horror, purely because it's one of the best things I've written, and there's a lot of unexpected to it, but there's something also just very old-fashioned Hollywood weirdly about it, which it's just one of those films I really do dream about making. And there's another one, Anglesey Road is my first short film. I've written a feature version of that, which I mean, that is full on horror. There will be lots of jumps and things in that, and I'm very ready to go ahead with that one. And that again there's something much more original about that than anything else that I've written, because I've put a lot of personal experience and locations that I know people wouldn't expect to see in a film in there, and a character that people wouldn't expect to be doing what that character is doing in a film. So that's what I'm very excited about. So yeah, I think those two, Anglesey Road and the other one I mentioned.
Wonderful. Okay, well, we're just coming up to the end of the session, so I just wanted to take a time to say thank you so much to Russell for joining us today, and of course to Shelby for coming back and doing such a great job hosting again. If you would like to find out more about our BFI Film Academy Labs, upcoming ones, please do sign up to our newsletter. The details are both on our webpage, and we will circulate the address after this webinar as well. So thank you very much again. It's been an absolute pleasure, and yeah, we hope to see you all again soon. Thanks, Russell. Thank
you very much, Shelby.